Hello everybody, and welcome once again to Foxy's Fun Inspirational Chats, and today I will be hosting your show. Well, in this episode, this is about a man who one day there was a man called Chris Huxford. Now Chris was a man who worked as a carpenter most his life, and one weekend, he didn't need to go into work, he decided to go into a forest. He decided to tour the forest, taking some nice walks. Whilst Chris was curiously wandering and striding around the arboreal forest with lumbers of tall trees. The trees were tall enough, these trees are tall enough to be skyscrapers, Chris said to himself as he explored the arboreal forest. As he was exploring the forest, something caught his eye. The moment that the attraction caught his eye, Chris stopped and was impaired to move any further. What is that? Chris asked to himself in surprise. There, in front of him, in the very near distance, was a rusty old little cottage. Well, it wasn't a cottage, it was a rusty old wooden house just sitting in the forest. It was totally abandoned and nobody was in there. Chris inched himself slowly forward to the abandoned house. He inched it closer and closer and stopped again. This time he didn't feel as impaired to move. He decided to come to a conclusion. This house was owned by a couple many years ago, he thought to himself. They must have abandoned the forest because they may have thought it was too dangerous to be in the arboreal forest. Or maybe because they feared carpenters would just tear down the whole forest. As he concluded, much more thoughtfully than ever, he decided to inspect the insides of the abandoned rusty little cottage himself. He opened the door, and all he could see was just a room of spacious floors and a broken, battered-looking sink and kitchen. The whole house inside was torn from dust to object. The stairs were dusty dusty cement sand laying on the brick layer, or or leftover cement or leftover sand just tossed around a pavement or on a construction site. He went upstairs. The inside of the cottage was basically a ghost house, silent as a mouse and quiet as the woods except for the birds happily tweeting away. Yep, Chris said to himself, this is certainly a cottage abandoned by a former couple. He came to his conclusions and gave out his predictions. But then he came up with an idea. This house doesn't need to be looking like this, he said to himself with great thought. I think this house could be a Christmas house. A Christmas house to get together with friends before you have a Christmas party before Christmas. As he thought about this, his ideas made him feel excited. So, after taking his very, very last inspection of the abandoned wooden cottage in the arboreal forest, he walked out of the cottage and walked his way out of the woods. He got into his car, started up the engine, and drove back home as quickly as he could. After he got home and walloped onto his sofa, he got his phone out of his pocket and decided to give his boss a ring. "Mr. Huxford," his boss said on the phone. "It's the weekend. What is it?" Oh, boss," Chris said in excitement. "I think you might like to see something on Monday." "Mr. Huxford, I asked you to do an assignment to make some furniture, wooden furniture. But if it's not going to be too late or too long to start your assignment on Monday," the boss said bluntly, "we'll have a quick look. First thing in the morning on Monday." "Of course, boss," Chris replied in excitement. "Right away, boss." And he and his boss respectfully ended the telephone conversation. All Chris had to do was get through his weekend before showing his boss the arboreal forest and the abandoned wooden cottage. The weekend soon enough passed, and Chris had to get up especially early, earlier than he usually has to start work. Getting up at an exceptional 5 o'clock in the morning, he just jumped into the shower, exhausted, cooked up his breakfast of porridge, and after he had his breakfast, he walked out of his little home and went to drive to the forest, as he was expected to meet his boss at the forest. Soon enough, Chris Huxford met his boss, John, and Chris and John walked into the arboreal forest surrounding of tall trees. The tallest trees his boss had ever seen, which really surprised his boss. "Mr. Huxford," the boss said in surprise, are these trees skyscrapers?" "No, boss, it's just one arboreal forest," Chris replied to his boss in deep honesty. "Oh, I see," said the boss, without a great deal of excitement. All the boss was very interested in seeing why Chris was so excited to have seen the cottage. As the walk loomed on, soon enough they came to the cottage. "Ta-da! Here's the abandoned cottage," Chris pointed out to his boss as they stopped, and Chris pointed out to the battered and rusty-looking old cottage just abandoned in the arboreal forest. The boss just looked at it for a moment. Then he began to stare for quite some time. He looked at the cottage for ages and hesitantly made up his mind. Well, Mr. Huxford," the boss said, "it appears this cottage you found really actually could be useful for a special house." "Yes," Chris replied in honesty. "What do you think?" "It could be useful for when we expect snow, but doesn't always happen every winter. Happens at our most wonderful time of the year," the boss hinted at. "Of course, that's exactly what I was thinking over the weekend," and Chris replied in excitement and realization to what his boss was thinking. This battered, rusty old little cottage could be a Christmas house for your friends to hang into, like say a week or so before Christmas. Like a little Christmas get-together or a big Christmas get-together. That's exactly what I was thinking. I think our carpentry team should work hard to restore this little cottage, which has been clearly abandoned by a former couple, to turn into a Christmas house. We can reserve this arboreal forest for ourselves and stop lumber mills and logging companies from tearing it apart, as we have our own logging company, which is private." "Good idea," said the boss. "I think the other half we could own as our own logging company to tear down, but this part where the cottage is, let's not tear down the trees where the trees belong. This makes it magical for Christmas, seeing arboreal bushes and all these tall arboreal trees surrounding the little cottage. This cottage, Mr. Huxford," the boss said happily, "will no longer be a battered, rusty-looking cottage anymore. It will soon be a Christmas house for Christmas get-togethers." We'll call up your team of carpenters and your carpentry team and get this house restored in time for a Christmas season or the festive jolly season. Chris and his boss just couldn't agree more with the plan. Soon the plan was coming underway. It was obviously going to take some time before the cottage was going to be made or ready for Christmas. So they all had to work quickly and very, very hard to get the cottage fully restored in time for Christmas in order for it to be a Christmas house for the Christmas season for friends to gather before Christmas. The work persisted, but it wouldn't just require Mr. Huxford's carpentry team. His boss, John, hired his friends and construction company to also help with the restoration, and a private decorating company to actually decorate the whole house. The work began, but they had to work quickly if they wanted to get it ready before Christmas. The work persisted over countless weeks. It seemed like forever because the work was so intense. But at least they came up with a plan, and unfortunately, Chris had to postpone his carpentry requirement for making wooden furniture for his boss's clients. But the clients didn't mind, and the clients were happy to wait as they didn't need it for some time, but they just would have liked to have had it early. Before long, December arrived. The rusty battered cottage was no longer looking like a rusty battered cottage anymore. It was looking more festive and pretty. It was soon finished. "I have to say, Mr. Huxford," the boss said in surprise and very happily, "you, I do say, have saved Christmas. And I have to say, this is going to be a good day for our business. I have to say, Mr. Huxford," the boss said, "I'm going to promote you to a higher rank in our carpentry business. But you still have to abide to my rules despite getting a higher promotion." Chris just couldn't agree more and couldn't have felt happier. Normally his boss was relatively hard to please, but would eventually be pleased if you gave him an impression. But Chris's idea had impressed his boss so much, his boss, in surprise to Chris, decided to give him a promotion relating to his job. At last the cottage was finished. The battered rusty cottage was now a festive, decorated, pretty-looking Christmas house, with streamers and tinsel decorated around the roof, and some garland wrapped around the front door. And the door, no longer looking rusty, painted a dark brown and a mottled cream on the other half. The house was now pretty. And now, well, it was now time to start some Christmas celebrations. Before long the house was nothing but ready to use as for a Christmas party. The furnaces and ovens were ready to cook up Christmas food. The toilets had been fixed by the plumbers and fully fixed and built, ready for people if they need to use the toilet and wash their hands. And before long, the battered rusty cottage was now a Christmas house for a Christmas party. The Christmas party in the Christmas cottage was a success. After finishing a few months long carpentry project, on 6 days a week project, getting it done, Chris and his carpentry team could finally celebrate a very, very happy and a very jolly Christmas party before Christmas. Here's to a very Merry Christmas and a jolly time in our new Christmas Hangout House, Chris Huxford said in excitement as he raised a glass of champagne up in the air in his right hand. "Cheers, everybody, to a very, very Merry Christmas." "Cheers," called Chris's carpentry team. "Cheers, Mr. Huxford," cheered his boss, and not appearing so grumpy. They all tapped and chimed their glasses together in celebration, sipped up their champagne glasses, ate up their food, and began enjoying the Christmas party before playing some Christmas music, doing lots of singing and dancing in the week ahead before Christmas. Chris went back to home, got into his bed, and was about to fall asleep happily, thinking of the wonderful promotion for his carpentry work he was going to have in the new year, in the approval of his boss, and also feeling like a dedicated carpenter and a dedicated worker in his company for finding such an extraordinary sight to turn into something very, very worthwhile before Christmas. Merry Christmas, everybody, he sighed to himself as he closed his eyes and peacefully went to sleep. So that is the story of the Christmas Hangout House in episode 2, a Christmas episode. Thank you all for watching, everybody. Thank you all for listening in and tuning in to the story. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye, everybody. From Foxy, and thank you all indeed for listening and watching another time.